Alright, so here's my daughter's 1996 Ford Taurus GL. In the last installment, I replaced the rear struts on this car. Actually, that was just yesterday. In test driving the car, it did exactly what I thought it would do. The rear struts elevated the rear end, but they elevated it enough that it really showed how bad the front struts were. Originally, I was going to wait a while in order to replace the front struts, but because of the way the car is driving right now, I'm going to go ahead and replace the front struts. So in this set of video, I will hopefully be able to show you how to replace the front struts on a 1996 Ford Taurus GL. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the wheel nut or the lug nut cover on the wheels, and then we're going to loosen the lug nuts before we jack the car up so that we can remove the wheels. Now that we have the lug nuts loosened, we'll go ahead and jack the car up and we'll get it ready so that we can remove the wheel. Alright, before you jack the car up, make sure you set the emergency brake and or put something behind the rear wheels to keep the car from moving on you. Pick a point under the frame that's safe to jack the car up. Once you have the car jacked up, you want to set a jack stand underneath the car. And then we're going to drop the car down onto the jack stand. That'll give the car a secure platform so that we can work on it. Now that we have the car safely jacked up, we're going to go ahead and remove the wheel so that we can get into the strut and get it off the car. Now with the wheel out of the way, we can see what we have to work with in here. Alright, so here's the strut, this piece right here. This is what we're getting ready to remove from the car. So as we look around in here, there's a couple of points that we have to remove. We have this bar right here that has to come out. You've got your pinch bolt right here that's going to have to come out. We've got this brake tube clip right here that we've got to pull off and out of the way. And it looks like we've got the brake line right here that we've also got to get it off of the strut and out of the way as well. So it looks like that's all that we have to move. What we're going to do on this one, I did not do this on the rear struts, but we're going to do it on the front ones here. We're going to spray the bolts down with WD-40, or in this case I'm going to use PB penetrating catalyst. I've never used this before, so we'll see how well it works. But you can use WD-40 or anything that will help penetrate the threads to make removal of the bolts a little bit easier. And we'll spray this side down, and then we're going to go pull the wheel off the other side. We'll spray it down, and then we'll come back and start working on this side. As I said, I don't know how well this stuff will work, so we'll find out. It does make a mess. Should have put down some cardboard or something before I started, so we'll clean that up a little bit before we climb under the car and start removing everything. Alright, now that I have both sides of the car jacked up, the wheel's off, all the nuts and bolts are sprayed down, it's time to remove the bolts, or not remove, but loosen the nuts on the top of the strut assembly. So pop the hood on the car. If I have to show you where the hood release is, you really don't want to be doing this job by yourself. Pop the hood on the car. You've got your strut right here. You've got the 3 bolts that hold it together. Got this one vacuum line that will just simply pop off. But what we want to do is we want to loosen these 3 bolts. We're not going to remove them completely. We're just going to loosen them so that the strut has the ability to move as we're working on it. And I'll bet anybody out there who wants to, $10, I'm going to forget to hook that back on. Hopefully I won't, since I just told you I'm going to, but that'll be the first thing I forget to do. Alright, now we're going to move back down to the side of the car. So we're going to start by removing this link right here. I'm going to have the same problem I had yesterday, but I don't have a good set of deep well sockets, and I should have bought those while I was out earlier. So I'm also not going to have a good end wrench that's that size that I'm going to be able to get to it. So I'll be back in a little bit. I'm going to go buy some deep well sockets. Now, as I said, the right tools make these jobs much easier. So now I've gone out, bought some deep well sockets. Alright, so the problem we have now is when you turn that nut bolt, the whole stud assembly is turning as well. They make a special socket for this, of which, of course, I don't have. So we're going to try and get it off another way. So once you have it loose, what you can do is use a pair of pliers or a wrench or something to grab a hold of the bolt, or the nut, pardon me. And then come in, you'll see on the spindle coming through, you can put an 8mm socket on the end of it. So get something to hold the bolt. Come in with that 8mm socket, and then you can get this piece and turn it off. Now, one thing to point out as you're doing this, alright? As you're taking this off, you're tightening the spindle. So instead of setting the ratchet so that you're loosening the bolt, you need to set it so that you're tightening it. And what that'll do is that'll back out this spindle. That'll back out this spindle off of the bolt so that you can get everything off. And as you can see by looking at this, this may be a part that I need to replace as we're going through this process as well. So I'll have to research into that a little bit. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is remove this bolt right here, which holds the brake line in place, keeps it connected to the spindle. Pull that out so it's loose. Alright, you can see that that's loose now. Now we're going to pull this clip off for this other line. Alright, so when I tried to pull it out, it was hanging up on that bracket right there. So by sliding it up the strut a little bit, I was able to pull it off without having to fight it anymore. Okay, that's everything that's holding that in short of the pinch bolt here, which is the last thing that we're going to pull out. Unlike the rear struts, this one doesn't thread into the spindle, so it's a bolt with a nut on one end. So now that I've gotten it broken loose a little bit, I'm going to clamp onto the head of the bolt so that we can keep it from spinning. Alright, there we go. Bolt nut off. That's it. That's everything that holds this thing together. So now we're going to get our block of wood and a hammer, and we're going to knock it off. This again is going to be a very tedious process. We're going to put a block of wood up here around the spindle edge here, and then we're going to just drive it down with a hammer until it comes all the way off. Make sure as you're doing this that your brake line's out of the way. Last thing you want to do is pinch one of those lines and break them. That's coming off very nicely. You can tell there how it's already slid down about a ½ inch or so. One of the things that I'd done as well was I sprayed the PB along that knuckle joint to try and get it to soak in there. So I'm not sure if that's helping this come off or not, but this is coming off a lot easier than the rear ones did. One of the things that I'd read as I was looking at this project, which I was hoping wasn't going to be the case, is that the subframe has to drop in order to get this out. Alright, so here's what I'm talking about. This right here is a control arm. Notice in that cutout right there, see how that control arm is at the bottom of that cutout? It's not going to drop any further. So the only way to get that thing to come down further, which is going to be required in order to get the strut out of the knuckle, is to drop the frame down. This is the frame right here. A lot of these newer cars have what's called subframes, which means they don't have a full frame that runs the length of the car. Instead, what they have is this little half frame right here. It goes through along the engine and then ends right there. The rest of the car is just really the body of the car. You can see how there's some beefed up sections of the frame as it goes back, or of the body itself, pardon me, but it's not like an old car where you actually had a full rolling frame. The new cars just aren't built that way anymore. So what we're going to have to do is pull that bolt right there, come back up here at the front, pull that bolt right there at the front. Alright, then we're going to have to support that and either jack the car up off of it or lower the frame, whichever ends up being the easier way. Unfortunately, I've got to figure out how I'm going to handle this because my other jack frames right there, my other jack stands right there, and then we have the one that's holding up this side of the car. So somehow I need to support this subframe so that I can make all this happen. Alright, as you can see, I have a jack stand there at the back of the subframe. And then at the front, since I didn't have any more jack stands, I beefed it up with some wood. That's not necessarily the way I'd suggest doing it, but it's what I had to do because it's all I had available. So now what we're going to do is get up in there, start to loosen that bolt. and drop the subframe down a little bit. Okay, so we don't want to remove these bolts. I don't want to have to mess with trying to realign the subframe and get everything put back up in place correctly. I also don't want to drop the bolts on the subframe on both sides at the same time. Both sides meaning the left and the right. We're going to do the front and the rear, but I don't want to do the left and the right at the same time. Now the reason for trying to support the subframe as we do this, it's going to make getting the bolts out easier, okay? You don't want to use these bolts to lift and drop the subframe. You want the pressure to be off of the bolts and placed on your jack stands or your support, whatever you have to block it up. Okay, we're going to stop there. I don't know if you can tell how much I backed that out. I didn't back it out a lot, maybe a ½ inch, a little bit further. We're going to stop right there, and we're going to now back out the back one. Same process. We don't want to drop it completely. We just want to drop it enough so that we can lift the car probably another ½ inch to an inch in order to get the car high enough that we can get this spindle to clear the strut. And pardon my language, but for those of you thinking it, you're right. This is an asinine design. Thank you, Ford. I don't know if that's far enough, but we're going to try it. So now that we have all that loosened, we're going to jack the car up. Okay, I don't know if you can see all this. Back it back down a little bit. The whole purpose of why we had to do that. Just watch right there where that jack stand is. Alright, as I'm going to jack up, you're going to see the car lift, but that subframe's not moving. That's what we want. Okay, now the subframe's starting to move, so we're going to stop. But if we come down here and look, I don't know if you can tell, but I gave us a little bit of a gap, not a huge gap. So let's see if it's enough to get the strut out. So now, the other thing we want to be careful here. I don't want to pull this out of the transmission. So we want to be careful as we're doing this that we don't pull the spindle down here too far so that it causes that shaft to come out of the transmission. So again, it's just paying attention and being careful. As you can see right here, that gave me enough flex that the strut is now out of that joint and I'm going to be able to get it out. So before I move any further down here, I'm going to go up top. I'm going to pull those bolts the rest of the way off. Now, if you're anything like me, you're thinking the pain in the rear to have to drop that subframe in order to get this strut out. The good and the bad of it, it is a pain in the rear. But once you resolve yourself to the fact that you have to do it, it took less than 10 minutes to do it. It's just overcoming that mental block that you have to do it in order to get everything out. So now that we've got all that out, now we're going to work on just maneuvering the strut out of the car. Careful all the brake lines, and you'll get the strut out right there. Now let me grab the new strut and we'll see about getting it back in. So here's the new strut. Again, what I'm using is the Economatic line of Monroe struts. It's not the most expensive strut out there by any stretch of the means. It's made for economy, for lack of a better phrase. But it's also not the cheapest strut out there. As with the rear struts, there's this little yellow tag that says this side up. If you've really got to be told which side needs to go up, this is not a project you want to be tackling. So I'm going to get that little yellow tab off, and then we're going to work on putting the strut up in there. Notice on the head plate here, you've got this flat side over here. That flat side goes to the outside of the car. By putting that to the outside of the car, you put the tabs to the inside of the car. See in the spindle right there, see where the split is on that pinch nut? That tab right there is going to slide into that slot. This bottom hole down there of that tab, that's going to line up where the pinch pin goes through, the bolt goes through to tighten everything up. So let me get that tab off, then we'll see about getting the strut put up in the car. I guess one thing to mention here, you saw me pull a sticker off the top of the strut. I'll go ahead and mention it. This bolt right here, don't remove it. If you remove that bolt, you're going to let all the tension of the spring come loose, and that spring's going flying unless you put a coil spring clamp on it to tighten it down to keep that from happening. That's why we bought this strut. It's a complete assembly. We don't have to take it apart. We don't have to do anything to it. We simply put it in the car. Don't remove that bolt right there. Alright, so now we're going to try and get it up in the car. Again, as you're putting it up in there, be careful of the brake lines. You want to make sure you don't pinch anything as you're going up. Okay, so let's see if I can do this effectively. I've got the bolts through, the hole at the top. Well, we've got the bolts through right there. So now what we're going to do is put the bolts on them, the nuts on them, to hold the top in place. We'll go ahead and move those down hand tight. Alright, now that those are in place, we'll come back down. The next thing we've got to do is to get everything in place down here. And unfortunately, I'm going to hope it isn't so, but notice how my spindle dropped out. There's a good chance I pulled the shaft out. Well, we're going to find out. And try and get everything lined up here. Careful of the brake line. Alright. Right there was what I was looking for. Everything should be lined up fairly well there. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to drop the jack. That'll pinch everything back down. Okay, so now the subframe's resting on my stand. Now we're going to move the jack under the spindle so that we can lift the spindle up onto the strut. Alright, so it's probably not the best place to do this, but if you can tell, where I'm going to jack up. I'm going to jack up on that lower ball joint, which is on the bottom of that control arm that holds the spindle to the control arm. Probably not the best place to do that, but it's going to accomplish what we need it to accomplish. Now if you watch, notice how the spindle is sliding up on the jack, or up on the strut. It just stopped on me a little bit. Let's make sure everything's lined up. It's not. There we go. Too far. Okay, if you remember earlier, I told you that tab in the back is going to go up in that slit on the pinch connector. So what was just going on was that tab was misaligned and it wasn't going into that slit the way it needed to. Notice how it's going up now very easily. Alright, so now what we want to do as we're going up with it, we want to watch through the hole. We're going to watch through the hole right there. We're going to watch for that slot to come down so that we can get our bolt through. Notice there's the slot right there. Did I just go too far? Hold on. Okay, so see the blue tab in there at the bottom of the hole. We want to keep lifting until that tab is out of the hole and we can get our bolt through. So right there should allow us to get our bolt through a little bit further. See it there at the bottom? Alright, now we should be able to get our bolt through. Maybe, maybe not. Thought I had it out of the way. It still may be in there a little bit. Obviously more in a little bit. There we go. It's all the way in. It's out on the other side. I'm not sure if you got me tightening down that bolt, but that was the last thing we did, was put this bolt in, tighten it down. That's a 21mm bolt. We're going to put the brake line back on. It's a 10mm bolt. The top bolts at the top of the strut, those were 13mm bolts. So you need a 21mm, 13mm, and a 10mm. The frame mount bolts that we dropped for the subframe, those were 18mm. Where we'll put a wrench on the nut and we'll screw it in, be it with the threads. Not even let me get on there very far before it starts spinning. So this time we're going to loosen it. By loosening it, it's going to screw the nut back into place. There we go. Alright, I'm going to point this out. I missed this on my first go around. Alright, so down here is where, and I'm going to say all this incorrectly. See that hole right there that's on this clamp? There's one on the front side of it. There's also one back here on the back side of it. Alright, see that little pin that sticks through right there off that piece? You need to slide this clamp down, put it in so that that pin goes through and holds all of that in place. I'm going to get that in place and I'll show you what it looks like. So when it's said and done, you can see it right there. So this brake line holds this clamp in place as well. Just make sure you get that in place before you screw everything back down. Alright, so there it is with everything in place. Got the nut on it, nut and bolt on it now. As you can see, I've got that little piece on the clamp sticking through. We'll hold this bigger clamp in place. Everything's in place here on the outside. So what's left is we need to screw the subframe back into place and we need to tighten the bolts up on top. Alright, now that everything's tightened up on the bottom, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the top. Okay, for those of you that remember, I said I'd bet you 10 bucks I was going to forget to put this bracket on the top. Nope, I didn't forget. So you should have bet me. But look at the bright note. I'd say this instructional video is worth 20 bucks. Since I owe you 10 bucks, we'll just call it even. Alright? Thanks. So now what we're going to do is put the subframe back up into place. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is an 18mm bolt. Alright, now that that one's done, let's move to the other one. Now the easy part, we'll put the wheel back on. All in all, this isn't too bad of a job. If you're not mechanically inclined, then I wouldn't suggest tackling this, either the front struts or the rear struts. I would almost say the front struts are easier than the rear struts. The rear struts require you to rip out the back seat and do some other things in the car. The fronts just seem to be a little bit easier. The biggest thing about the fronts are, excuse me, you have to resolve yourself to the fact that you're going to drop the subframe. As soon as you resolve yourself to the fact that you're going to do that, this project goes very quick and very easy. In all, I would say it probably took me total about an hour, hour and 20 minutes to pull the strut out on this one side and to put the new one in. The other side of the car will actually get done a little bit quicker. This side was all the learning curve in order to get it done. So I'll also mention, like I said, if you're not mechanically inclined, I wouldn't attempt this project. I by no means am a mechanic, as you've seen as we've gone through this. It's probably been 20 years since I've replaced the struts on a car. It's not that difficult of a job. If you understand the concepts of working on a car and working with tools, then it's really not that difficult of a job. Take you anywhere from an hour to 2 hours to do each side. In all, 4-hour job will save you $1,000. Anyway, thanks for watching.